I think a lot of white people don't think about race, and I think that's a real problem. And I think that until you're willing to get, it's like fitness, like, not to bring it back, because we all know I love to work out, but like, if you're working out and you're not uncomfortable, you're not getting stronger. And I think the same holds true for like
That's
life.
right.
Like, you have to sometimes put yourself into uncomfortable spaces in order to get stronger, to grow, to learn. And I think that a lot of people don't like to be uncomfortable.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor, and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, Tony Tidbit. And so we're live at WNHU 88.7 on the Richter dial at the University of New Haven. We want to thank them for hosting the Black Executive Perspective podcast in their fabulous studio. Really appreciate the partnership. Go Chargers. And for you, don't forget to check out our partners, Code M Magazine, whose mission is to save the Black family by first saving the Black man. Check them out at codemmagazine.com. So, in the article, Why It Can Be So Hard to Talk About Race, that was published a few weeks ago in Psychology Today, doctors Monica T. Williams and Sonia Faber discussed the complexities of racial discourse. They state, and I quote, "When it comes to talking about race, there's a big difference between the way white families and Black families approach the subject. Studies have found that white children are typically taught from a young age not to discuss race, that it's something taboo, something we shouldn't talk about. But the truth is, ignoring the problem of race doesn't make it go away. It only reinforces existing systems of racial inequity. On the other hand, Black families don't have the luxury of ignoring race. They know that their children will be profiled and treated differently from others, often as early as preschool. They understand that talking about race is not only necessary, but also empowering, as it allows them to understand and navigate the world around them. It's not that white people are bad or racist, it's just they are socialized not to notice these problems. Most have been taught to see the world in a certain way, and that way doesn't include an understanding of the ways racism and bias cause harm. White people are taught not to see the racism that is right in front of them on a daily basis. Today, our guest, Courteney Mitchell, will share her personal journey navigating the complexities of racial discussions, her experience with racial awakening, and the ongoing process of educating and self-reflection. Courteney Mitchell, welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, my sister.
Tony, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you, Courteney, for coming on and talking about, a very, I would say, a topic that we need to talk about a lot more. So I appreciate you coming on and willing to jump in and share your story. But before we jump in, let's get a little bit about you. Tell us where you're from, where you're living at, and a little bit about your background.
Sure. I've lived in Massachusetts for most of my life. I'm currently in Boston. Mom to two little cats. They just turned 6. Adopted them from we rescued them from the mean streets of Newark, New Jersey. Allie and Ava. I work in advertising sales for my full-time job, and then I have side hustles. I teach fitness around Boston, and do production work on large-scale events.
Okay, awesome. And look, you got your Boston gear on, right? Celtics,
The
going
Boston
for the
gear.
win tonight, right? They're going for the championship win.
Well, Tony, it's 6-1-7, and then what a more, could there be a more perfect day for the Celtics to win Banner 18? I was actually in the building on 6-1-7-2008 when they destroyed the Lakers in Game 6. So I've given up I used to go to all of the games. Now I watch from the couch. Once you get older, the 9 p.m. start time doesn't really work out so well
No,
anymore.
so true. It's so true, right? But you're going to be up all night because that's your team. You're going to be rooting for them, even if the game
I'm
started at
wired.
midnight. So you'll be there, right?
And I'll be there. They're very fun to watch this year. It's you get attached. I feel like you get like attached to teams. Like I'm definitely very attached to the '08 guys. Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Rondo, Perk, and the cast of characters that helped them win then. But this team is really really fun to watch when they're on. They play great basketball.
Well, let's see. Look, I love the Celtics. I love their team. I like Luka Doncic a lot, so I was rooting for them just because they're in the beginning. I thought from the beginning Boston would win. So tonight could be the night, where Beantown is popping champagne. So we'll see how it plays itself out.
Well, Tony, champagne is one of my other favorite things, and I got some cases in my closet down here. So.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, let me ask you this. Obviously, we've talked. Why did you want to come on a Black Executive Perspective podcast to talk about this topic?
Well, you and I used to work together at Warner Media, RIP. And I think when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, people just didn't really know what to do. And you started those conversations on race, which gave people from all walks of life within the company a venue to be able to have these difficult conversations and learn how to have these difficult conversations with other people. And I really miss those. And I was really happy to be able to sort of come on here because I've honestly, Tony, I've learned so much from you in the years that we've known each other. So I'm really happy to come on here and sort of talk about the impact that all this learning has had on me personally and professionally.
Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. So you ready to talk about it?
Yeah, let's dig in.
All right, let's talk about it, right? And one of the things when I read that article in Psychology Today, it really I think it's something that I want hopefully all of our audience can go check out because it's really very eye-opening, and it's something that we've dealt with for centuries. Our fear to talk about race, right? And I remember going back, back when the George Floyd thing happened, and I got everyone together, and I was just listening to people, and people were saying I didn't know this was going on. I wasn't aware of these things. I didn't have a clue. And these were white people, our white colleagues that were saying these things. And I was looking I didn't say nothing, but I was looking at them like, how don't you know? Right? You can see these things. But as, Dr. Williams and Dr. Favor stated, is if you're brought up not to talk about race, it's taboo. And you're not, nobody's teaching you to be aware of these things, you wouldn't know. And I know people are like, oh, that's not true. They shouldn't know. No, they wouldn't know because these things don't affect them, right? So, Courteney, let's back up a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up. Because look, my wife, she grew up outside of Boston, Maynard, Mass. Okay, which was a small town, which Maynard, Mass, right? And she said it was one black family in the whole town. And she wasn't exposed to the things that I was exposed to. So talk to us a little bit about your background, and how diversity either played a role or didn't play a role in your life.
Yeah, so I'm from a small town in Western Mass, probably not unlike Maynard. It's called Belchertown. It's halfway between Amherst, where UMass Amherst is, and Springfield, which used to be a crown jewel of a city in Western Mass in the early part of the 20th century. There was very little diversity. I can count on one hand the number of Black people that I went to high school with. And then I remember going to college in 1997 and just being blown away by, Black people, people of different cultures, people from different countries, the international students, gay people. I mean, in the 1990s, that was, I mean, you were either straight or closeted in the 1990s. I don't think there were a lot of people that were really openly gay then. And so I was raised to believe that We treat everybody the way we want to be treated, regardless of what they look like or, disabilities or anything like that. We're just kind to everybody. And I really loved being thrown into an environment where I got to learn about so many different cultures and types of people, going to Northeastern and Boston in the late 90s.
That's awesome. So growing up, what was the town you grew up in again?
Called Belchertown. You can see it if you're on the Mass Pike. It used to be exit 7 and now it's exit 54.
Okay, so Belchertown, right? Not a lot of different. You said you can count on one hand of the students in your high school that were African American, what kids would be. So tell us a little bit about what was your idea about race at that time frame. And I get it. Your parents brought you up, treat everybody the same, blah blah blah. And a lot of people will say that, right? And their parents probably did teach them that. But going out and experiencing and seeing things could be totally different. So talk a little bit about based on how you grew up, what was your awareness when it came to race?
Honestly, Tony, and I thought a lot about this when we were talking about doing this. I didn't really I knew, like, my mom talked to me about when she was a teenager, when Emmett Till was murdered, and how seeing the image of him in print really impacted her and made her, a believer in the civil rights movement in the 60s. But I didn't really ever think about it. I mean, it was funny because, like, I think back now too, like in the 90s, like hip hop culture emerged. I loved hip hop music. I was into Tupac. I listened to like TLC, SWV, Salt and Pepper. I mean, I can still rap every word to Shoop. Like, I don't remember what I ate yesterday, but you put on that song, I know every word. Brandy, Monica, like the music that I listened to was very diverse, but I didn't, from like on an interpersonal level, I really didn't ever think about it. Like, and it's so weird to say now, like framing that now, like, what kind of idiot is this girl? Like, but it just wasn't something that was like on my radar at the time. Like, I learned about the civil rights movement. I learned about, the Civil War and slavery and, and it was one of those things where it's like, oh, civil rights movement, everything got fixed. We're happy. Everything's great. And I think that my personal awakening from that came in like the 10s when we started to have all of those publicized, like Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland. Those were the things that really were like, oh, maybe everything is not fixed. And I remember seeing some of like the Philando Castile shooting broke my heart. And I remember thinking, if this is all these things that are happening, and now we've got phones to record everything, how many things have happened in the last, 50 years that we don't know about because we didn't have the technology to record everything? And the thought, like thinking about framing it that way, I was like, oh, this is definitely, we've got problems here. And then I think at that time, I started to look at the spaces that I was in, like my gym and, the classes that I was taking and my workplaces. And then I started to notice, because again, like I was always taught, oh, you don't see color, like, and I'm like, well, that was when I started to realize, like, you have to see color, because if we're missing color in these spaces, why? And what do we have to do to make this a more accessible, comfortable space for everybody? And I remember having conversations with some of my Black friends, and one of my best friends from college, I love this girl. To this day, we are still very good friends. I remember her, like, and people, this is the thing, Tony, I don't think that people ever talked about this, but it's also possible because I never asked. And I remember asking her about her experiences, and she told me a story about getting pulled over by the police, driving while Black. And the officer said to her, I could do whatever I wanted to you and no one would ever believe you. And this girl is like Wharton Business School, like brilliant girl. And like to hear that she had gone through that, I was floored. Then I started having conversations with people at the gym who were like, oh no, we've never felt comfortable at this gym because of X, Y, and Z. And I was horrified. I'm like, well, what can I do to help make this, like, again, like the safe space for everybody? Because I don't, like, we have this community here. And I mean, I think that looking back and again, hindsight being 2020, and framing it is that it's really hard to be uncomfortable. And I think that thinking about these things makes white people very uncomfortable. And I remember I'm a member of the DAR. One of the reasons I joined the DAR was because I know it has a history of not being the most welcoming. And I think that you have two choices when you're faced with something like that. You can be like, well, I'm not doing that, or you can do it and try to change it. And I remember being in a meeting with some of my DAR sisters, and they were like, what does race have to? I'm like, well, it has everything to do with it, because you have to look at like the whole system.
So
But people
Court,
don't
real
like to
quick
think
though,
about
just
that.
so everybody's on the same page. When you say DAR, what is that?
That is the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Okay.
So the DAR, it's a great organization. The way it was framed to me, it was like it's a networking group for history nerds. To be a member, you have to trace your lineage back to someone who fought for the patriots in the American Revolution, and that's the other awakening I had, is that, like, thinking about genealogy, and that was my pandemic hobby in 2020. Black people are at such a disadvantage because you run into the brick wall of slavery, where there were no records. There's no records for Black people for the most part before 1865. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping, to be able to have an impact on. I'm doing some of their genealogy courses to be able to help use DNA to connect people when there's an absence of historical paper trail. But I think that again, it goes back to the fact that people just don't like to be uncomfortable. And I think that's why, like, that's one of the reasons I had blinders on, and some of these things just, and again, like, I have a very diverse friend group of all, you know me, I'm friends with everybody. Just having conversations with people is really what opened my eyes to the fact that this is not fixed and that this is still a problem. And then when you delve further into it, you read about the race riots that we never learned about in school. Tulsa, Houston, East St. Louis, like all the stuff that happened in the 1910s when Woodrow Wilson was in office, fanning the flames of racism by, resegregating. Things have been unsegregated. He resegregated a lot of things in the government. And, it's, you have to pay attention to these things. And that's, I think, one of the cool things about what you're doing is, I think from you, I learned that you really have to, like, and a very intellectually curious person. I love to go down a rabbit hole. So, when stuff comes up, I love to read about it and research it. And I think that's one of the things that is really important to getting more people to come around to the fact that things are not fixed, and there are things that we can do to help bring
Right.
light to some of these issues.
Right. So number one, thank you, Courtney. And just I want to let the audience know, this is Courtney. She didn't have 8 cups of coffee today. This is just who she is. She's a very high energetic individual, right? And so number one, I love her a lot, and I'm so glad that she's on and she's sharing. I just want to back up because you said a whole lot, and I want to back up a little bit, right?
I know I do.
But that's just who you are, Courtney.
I
So
do
it's all good.
tangent. I'm very
No, it's just who you are. So it's all good, right? So let's back up because I want to make sure we get back to the DAR thing, and there's a couple other things, but I want to go back just a little bit further because you said your parents said, you're not supposed to see color, okay? And again, going back to what Dr. Williams and stuff said, is that white families teach their children not to notice race, not to talk about race, right? So when you say, you're not supposed to, even though, and here's the thing, your parents sound awesome. You said your mother talked about Emmett Till, and she remembered that, and that, struck a chord with her. And they brought you up to treat everybody the same. So all those things are great. That's awesome, right? Because there's a lot of families, they don't even do that. Okay. But I just want to back up. I want to just put a pin in here. When your parent says, don't see color, and then going back to what Dr. Williams and Dr. Faber says is that white families are taught not to talk about race, right? And because they don't talk about it, they don't see the racism in front of you. So do you think that's a correlation in terms of your mother saying, don't see color? And then to your point, you're not noticing a lot of stuff. until you went to college and stuff, even though you are, intellectual, curious, you're a smart individual, you love history. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't necessarily know if it was that or the fact that I just grew up with no color. Like, um, Belchertown, and I think it's changed. I don't go home very. I have my parents come visit me.
So just to be clear though, so when you say don't grow up, you didn't grow up with any color, you're basically saying you didn't grow up with a lot of diversity around you. Is that what you're saying?
Not at all.
Got you.
Correct. And I think it might have. It's probably changed. I haven't. I don't. I'm not really up on the demographics of the town now, but in the '90s, it was very white.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit about your friends. Did race come up at all with your friends, or was there any derogatory terms or phrases that were said, or was it just because there was no people of color, they didn't really even talk about it? Tell us a little bit about that.
There was no people of color, and we didn't really even talk about it.
So you didn't even talk about it.
Like,
Okay, all right. And
yeah.
go ahead.
And then you contrast that, like when the George Floyd thing happened, I remember we had a call at Warner, and I remember one of our coworkers crying on the Zoom, and it made me cry, having to talk about how she talked to her sons about dealing with police. And that I never would have even thought about that. And I just remember being so floored that this woman had to have this conversation with her children. White people would never have to have that conversation with their kids. How to, that there could be a possibility that I could go out wearing a hoodie and a hat and get shot at. Like, I would never have even thought that, would never even cross the minds of anybody in my space.
Right.
And to
Right.
think that that's the type of conversation that people had to have, I was completely, that really impacted me.
So you were saying that, when you went to college, it was a rainbow coalition. Okay. I'm paraphrasing, right?
Yeah.
You were able to have friends
was.
from different backgrounds, religions, sexuality, the whole nine yards, and it really broadened your horizons. And I think you told one story of your friend, but what did you learn out of that you didn't learn when you were growing up in your town, Belcher?
Well, I think that I learned a lot about different countries and backgrounds. Like, I had friends that were in the Indian Students Association, and friends in like the gay and lesbian, and a lot of the international students. I was involved in the student government. I was involved in Greek life. Greek life was pretty white, although we did have the NPC. We had the regular Panhellenic and Greek life, and then we did have the Alpha Kappa Alpha was on our Sigma Gamma Rho. And so this is, me, I'm friendly with everybody. Everywhere I go, I'm like, I love to meet people. I love to talk to people. I love to learn about people. I just think I took it as a learning experience to learn about different people's backgrounds and how they grew up, where they grew up, what was different about where they grew up versus where I grew up. And like just broadening my worldview. I mean, at this point too, and I didn't really travel. I went out of the country once when I was in high school. We had a school trip to Costa Rica, and that was my only time ever having been out of the US. And so it was really cool to like learn about all these different cultures and read about all these different cultures, places that I'd never been.
Right.
I think for me, I just used it as a learning experience. And again, like never not thinking about like treating everybody equally. My mom always used to say, like, but by the grace of God, you're lucky to grow up who you are. You could have you could have grown up anyway. And so I always I think my whole philosophy in life is like, just be kind.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the same amount of effort to be nice as it does to be a jerk. So why would you choose to be a jerk?
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, like, I just use the learning about different cultures to sort of, again, just broaden my horizons. I never thought anything like, oh, that person is from here. Ew. Like,
yeah, I mean, you
that was not in my.
Yeah, you've always been a very open individual, right? Let me ask you this. Yeah, and I want to back up to the DAR thing, because you said, and what does it stand for again? Daughters.
The Daughters of the American.
Okay, Daughters of America. And you said you joined, you're a history buff, but you said that somebody said, why does race have anything to do with it? Tell us what happened there.
So I can't remember what I was talking about. It might have been my race in the military thing. Oh, or we were having some sort of conversation, and I said, well, the context of it I don't remember, but I just remember her being like, well, why would you feel guilty about that? It happened 100 years ago. And I'm like, I don't feel guilty about it. I feel badly that this happened to this group of people, and now they've been basically disenfranchised for 150 years.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people think about, you know, I think a lot of white people don't think about race, and I think that's a real problem. And I think that until you're willing to it's like fitness, like, not to bring it back, because we all know I love to work out, but like, if you're working out and you're not uncomfortable, you're not getting stronger. And I think the same holds true for like
That's
life.
right.
Like, you have to sometimes put yourself into uncomfortable spaces in order to get stronger, to grow, to learn. And I think that a lot of people don't like to be uncomfortable. People want to be happy. I mean, who doesn't love to, everybody loves to be comfortable, but sometimes you have to just get uncomfortable. And I think that especially older people of certain, not to like besmirch the boomers or the silent generation, but I think that a lot of those people, the way that they were raised was to like not talk about it. And I think that's how my generation, I'm Gen X,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how we were raised. We didn't talk about it. And then I mean, our lifetime, I was too young for Vietnam, so I don't have any recollection of that. We had like, the Berlin Wall came down. We had Operation Desert Storm and Iraqi freedom in the early 90s. And then we had 9/11. Our generation, like, we have had a very peaceful life if you think about it in context to like other generations in history. We've not been sent to, go die in a trench, or to land on a beach and face machine
Yeah.
gun nests. And I think that people just don't like to think about things that are unpleasant. And I think that racism is one of those things that people like to not think about because it's not pleasant to think about. And if you
Right.
actually think about it,
Right.
you're going to have like a reckoning as to like how messed up it is. And how like I remember reading about redlining and the ways that Black people have not been able to build generational wealth that puts them at a severe disadvantage compared to, white people. Um, and it like, how do we, like, this has to be fixed.
So, Courtney, let me ask you this. When I started the open conversation on race session at work, one of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to get everybody to come together. I wanted people to finally be in a safe space where they can hear other people's perspectives without having to be, without being judged or attacked, or the case may be. And so, we came up with ground rules. But the main thing I needed to do was for me to be authentic and be vulnerable. I needed to share my biases, the things that I deal with, right? And every human being has biases, and I had my own, and that was, I had to be vulnerable there if I'm looking for other people to be vulnerable. Okay, for other people to say, "Aha, I got it." For other people to say, "You know what, I was brought up this way, or I believe this, and you know what, I'm open to learning more," right? So I shared those things, and one was about the gay community. Growing up, hearing, being preached about, this is wrong, this is this, this is that. You're a young kid, you grow up and you believe that, and that's what you want out to the world with, right? So let me ask you this: you grow up, you got a great family. You are willing to, you're open to all different type of people, but going through your awakening, did you recognize any biases that you had?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And again, I think I said this earlier, like, in that time, you were either straight or closeted. And I remember also having a little bit of bias towards the gay community. My mother shut that down right away. My mom had gay friends. My mom, it works in psychology. And she shut that down. But it wasn't until I actually met gay people and became friends with them that I sort of, and that's I think the common theme when I've like looked at things. When I meet people and spend time with them and learn about them, the biases go away because I'm like, oh, I like that person as a human. Abraham Lincoln had a great quote: "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." And I think that for me, anytime I trend towards being like, oh, I try to think of, I try to see the good in people. For me, I think as a long time, I call myself a lifelong masshole. Um, I think that I do have a bias, and I this is something I've had to work on against people from like rural Southern America, particularly as the political divide in this country has uh, gotten wider. And when I think about like my first inclination when I react to something, sometimes I feel that, and then I have to like take a step back and sort of reframe my perception and be like, okay, we're all Americans. Everybody here, this is the best part about America is that we all have the right to our own opinion. I don't tell you what to think. I don't want you to tell me what to think, and I certainly don't want the government to tell me what to think. And I think that for me, like that taking a step back, or like, okay, um similar to you, like when you don't know about something, there's like that fear there, right? And you and I, we've talked about that in the conversations on race. False, um what is it,
False evidence
false
appearing real.
evidence appearing real. And I think that a lot of times, like I'll like having that, like that was such an eye opener when you did that session on fear, and I'll think, okay, is what is driving this? And I think that for a while I had the same bias thinking about the transgender community. And I remember the conversation on race we had where we talked about trans women in women's sports. And that completely changed my perspective because, again, like when you actually delve into it and look at the facts and talk to people, it's not really that much of a problem. But people like to use fear to make it a problem where there's
Right.
none,
Right.
to drive whatever agenda they're pushing. And I think that for
Right.
me with biases, it's like trying to find a human connection with somebody in that group to make it helps me understand that group better, and helps me again shift that perception to be coming, not coming from a place of fear, but coming from a place of like empathy and understanding.
No, that is great. And that's the thing, right? Is that, you know, we have a bias 9 times out of 10 on something that we've never experienced. All
Yeah.
right. And then to your point, once you experience, and that's the greatest teacher is meeting new people, meeting all different type of people and learning from all of them, right? And
Yep.
from that standpoint, now you may not, I may not like somebody because I don't like their personality. Okay, they can be arrogant or they can be this and that. That's something totally different versus I don't like this group of people. Okay, just
Correct.
because somebody told me something or because one person in that group did something wrong to me, now I'm pretty much going to label the whole group, right? So I appreciate you sharing that, right? Now, how do you continue to keep yourself educated in terms of, because it's a big world, right? And nobody knows everything. So how do you continue to stay educated when it comes to diversity?
Well, you know me, I am a voracious reader and consumer of media. I love the news. I know that a lot of people in America have news fatigue right now because of the last, we'll say, 10 years. It can be exhausting to, it's not good news. It doesn't make you feel good. Sometimes all I want to do is look at like reels of people's pets. But we have to stay informed. It's our job to stay informed. So I love to go down the rabbit hole, as I said, documentaries, books, TV shows, movies. Um, that is how I stay educated. And I also, again, try to foster human connection. If I don't understand something, I ask about it. Like when all that stuff was happening in the mid tens with, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, I had conversations with my Black friends. When the situation in the Middle East right now with Israel and Hamas, I have conversations. I've met a random person in a LinkedIn group who used to be a member of the IDF and has since like defected to the United States. And I got on the phone with this person and had a wonderful conversation about what it was like and what their feelings were on the whole crisis. I, have conversations with my Jewish friends about how one of my friends was with her daughter in their small town in New York, and there was an anti-Jewish rally. Like, what year are we in? and like just trying to have these conversations, ask people questions, and so that I can get a better understanding of how people who may be feeling marginalized are feeling. And then, you know, one of the things with all this situation in the Middle East is, you know, a lot of my Jewish friends don't feel supported. And I think we, on one of our last conversations on race, we like our friend Gab talked about, and I like was crying. Like it when you have these conversations and you can come at it from the perspective, like put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think that helps me. Now, before that conversation with Gab, I might have told you that I don't think that, you know, the government after World War One had a right to, or after World War Two had a right to give that land away. But with her perspective sharing, like, I do believe now that the Jewish people deserve to have a homeland, and these people have to get along. And I think that little efforts, you know, trying to just show your support and be an ally. I think that was the other thing after the George Floyd murder. Like, you can't be silent about this stuff and just think that silence can be complicitness in some of this stuff. And if I don't come out after George Floyd, I felt compelled. You know me, I don't post a lot on social media. I felt compelled to write a huge Facebook post about being an anti-racist and all of the things that have impacted me to make me have that point of view. And I think that it's similar. Like, you have to take a stand. You have to say something. You have to, you know, have those conversations and make your friends, you know, show your friends that you support them.
That's awesome. That is really awesome. So thanks for sharing that. So final thoughts. What's some of the things, give us some final thoughts, and what advice would you give listeners who's listening to this? All right. Who may not be as enlightened as you, who may still live in that small town where
Yeah.
there's not a lot of diversity, who may be afraid because of all the things that's pushed from a media standpoint about different groups and stuff to that nature, right? So, and let's be fair, there are people that's that way. That doesn't make them evil or bad. It's just, they're not informed. So, what recommendations would you give them?
I would say listen, have conversations with people, find people to have conversations with. We have the internet. Like, you can go find anybody to have a conversation with. If you want to do it anonymously, go on Reddit. Reddit has forums for everything. Yes, some of the people are trolls, and you got to weed out that. I would say base yourself in fact. Always check the sources on things. Don't just read something and be like, well, that's fact. Like, make sure you're getting it from credible news sources. Make sure you're having conversations with real people, and be willing to just listen without judgment. So I know, like, we're human, right? Someone can tell. Like, I remember a friend of mine in New York was telling me that she had, as a Black woman, had a hard time finding a cab to stop for her. And now Courtney, the fixer, is like, well, did you do this? Did you? And you can't ask those questions. You just listen and you empathize, and you remember that your friend it feels this way. It's how they feel. And you take that, and I have gone to New York with this particular friend and gone out and gotten us a cab because I know that she doesn't feel comfortable with that. And I think that, again, just learning and being able to be a good listener and being able to approach situations with empathy. And then again, if you feel like you don't like something, try to get to know it a little bit better before you write it off. There's always ways to find the good in people and or things. And remember that, especially if you're here in the US, like, that's the beautiful thing about America, is we all have the right to have our own feelings and opinions. And don't be judgmental. I think don't judge. Like, lose the judgment. That, I think, would be, if we could do that. But yeah, I mean, learn. Go down the rabbit hole. Visit museums. I will say, if you're in Washington, D.C., the National Museum of African American History and Culture is probably one of my favorite places that I've ever been. I have been twice for like 3 hours each time, and I still have like half the place to see. The fifth floor, and you and I have talked about this, there's an exhibit on Black people in the military, and I went down a real rabbit hole there, and culminating in me like visiting all these battlefields and historical sites in Europe. So I just like be open to learning and be curious and be kind. Like our old boss Tony used to say, stay curious and be kind.
Well, thank you, my friend. And look, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, you know, not just in terms of um, the words, but how you share with your passion, your energy. I think this is something that a lot of people can learn from, and I really appreciate you as a person. And I know you go out and all the people that you touch, they feel the same about you, right? Is that the energy that you bring, the love that you push out there. And, I said this a long time ago. Life is like a boomerang. Whatever you throw out,
Yeah.
comes back. So, Courteney Mitchell, thanks for appearing on a Black Executive Perspective podcast and sharing your perspective.
Tony, thank you so much for having me. You've changed my life and my given me the ability to have these difficult conversations with people in a respectful way, and I will forever be appreciative of that.
So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
And the tidbit today is, and I quote, conversations on race can be uncomfortable, but the only way to improve our understanding and reduce bias is through open, honest, and respectful dialogue. And you heard that today from Courteney Mitchell. So really appreciate that. So I want to remind everybody about our new BEP segment, Need to Know with Nsinga. You don't want to miss it. It comes out each Thursday. Need to Know segment by Dr. Nsinga Burton, where Dr. Burton is going to dive into the timely, crucial topics that shape our community and world. You want to definitely tune in to gain a unique insights and deepen your understanding of the issues that matter. You don't want to miss this every Thursday on BEP. Don't miss this week's Need to Know with Dr. Nsinga Burton. So I think it's now time for our call to action. Again, this is something that's very important to a Black Executive Perspective podcast. We exist because we have this platform where we want to have open and honest discussion to bring people together, to heighten their awareness. Our goal is to decrease racism and all the isms. So we're asking everyone, and this is something that everyone can do. It's something that you can control. Incorporate our call to action, which stands for LESS, LESS. L stands for learn. As Courteney said earlier, you want to learn about new people, new perspectives, history, things that you're not privy to make you more enlightened. E stands for empathy. Once you learn, you should become more empathetic to other groups and other individuals. S stands for share. We want everyone to learn and be enlightened, so you want to share what you learn to your friends and family. And the other S stands for stop. Our goal, your goal, is to stop discrimination as it comes in your path, right? So if you hear grandma or grandpa or Uncle Joe or Auntie Carol say in your path at the dinner table about a certain group, you say, grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt, we don't believe in that. We don't say that. And so you stop that discrimination right then. And by everyone doing this, we're going to create a more deeper and understanding world. And more importantly, we'll all be able to see the change that we want to see. This is something that we all can do one by one. You start in your own family, and guess what? We'll see that change. So I really appreciate you spending the time, investing the time to listen to another episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast. You can continue to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on our social channels of LinkedIn, X, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at a Black Exec. For our fabulous, energetic, loving guest, Courteney Mitchell. For Noel Miller, the producer behind the scenes that's making all this happen at the University of New Haven. I'm Tony Tidbit. We talked about it. We love you, and we're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.